Somewhere tonight, a lantern is burning for you. I am sitting in the pavilion now. The fire is small but well tended. Someone has built it carefully in the way someone builds a fire who has been building fires in this same place for a very long time. The small stones arranged at the right distance, the kindling laid where it catches without smoking, the kettle hung at the right height above the flame. I did not build it. It was already burning when I arrived. The kettle had already begun its soft breath. The clay cup on the warm stone beside it was clean and dry, and seemed, in some quiet way, to have been waiting. It is strange how a place can feel like it has been waiting for you. I do not say it often, but I felt it when I stepped in. There is a chair across the fire from where I sit. It is empty, but it was warm. I close my eyes, and I can still feel the climb, the way the path had risen, slowly, mile by mile, since the last village down in the valley. You walk a gentle slope in the morning, and by noon the slope has grown, and by mid-afternoon you are leaning into it with the weight of your satchel on your back, and your breath has begun to fog in the autumn air, and the leaves above you have begun to glow gold in the slant of the falling sun. I remember the leaves, the way the wind moved them, the way they came down around me as I climbed, yellow and amber and pale russet, drifting through the slow afternoon, settling on my shoulders, on the cloth wrapped around my satchel, on the page of my chart when I unfolded it to check the way. It is not easy mapping this dangerous world. I remember the rumor. The old woman at the well in the village 3 days down had said it. She had been drawing water as I had filled my flask, and she had looked at me for a long, careful moment, and she had asked, in the way old women ask things when they already half know the answer, "Have you heard, traveler, about the dog man on the long hill?" I told her I had not. She had told me slowly, as if she did not quite believe she was telling it, that on the long hill above the village, at the old stone pavilion that nobody used anymore, there lived a creature they called the Dog Man. A man who could take the shape of a dog, and did when the cold came down. Sometimes gentle, sometimes wary, depending on the heart of whoever climbed the hill. And that every winter he howled at the moon and at the long valleys for a mate whose howl had not come back in many years. Because the dog man, the woman had said, was a thing the world had not quite finished making, and the world does not always send a mate for those. She had said, nobody goes up to look. Nobody wants to disturb him. But sometimes, she had said, in the deep of winter when the wind is right, you can hear him from the bottom of the long hill, the howl that goes out, and the long quiet, and the howl that does not come back. I had marked the long hill on my chart that evening. In the small, slow way I mark a place that pulls at me. A dot, a circle around the dot, a word, pavilion, beside it. I had climbed I had reached the pavilion as the last gold was leaving the air. I had seen the lantern hung from the low beam, glowing already, lit by some hand I had not seen leave. I had seen the empty chair and the burning fire, and the dog asleep on her folded blanket on the stone bench by the wall. She had not stirred. I had stood in the entry for a long minute, watching her breathe and looking at the chair and waiting for someone to come. No one had come, so I had stepped in, quietly. I had set my satchel against the post. I had poured a cup of tea from the warm kettle into one of the 2 cups on the hearth, the one nearer the chair I now sit in, and I had sat down, and the dog had not stirred. I opened my eyes. The cup is still warm in my hands. The chair across the fire is still empty. The dog is still asleep, her chest rising and falling in the slow, soft way of dogs who are dreaming. The lantern above us burns steady. The autumn leaves drift in through the columns of the pavilion and settle on the warm stones, and on the dog's blanket, and on my boots, and around the rim of the empty cup beside the empty chair. I do not know when he will come back. I do not know if he will come back tonight at all. But I will tell you, friend. I will tell you, since you are the one who is here, what they told me of the dog man. The way I heard it on the road, the way it comes to me now. I will tell it slowly. I will tell it as I remember it. There is no hurry. The kettle will keep. The fire will keep. The night is long, and the chair is patient. I should tell you first about the hill itself. The villagers call it the Long Hill, though it is not the longest hill in the country, and not the highest, and not the steepest. It is only the most patient. It rises from the river valley in a slow, steady climb that begins in the orchards and goes on past the orchards into the high meadows, and past the high meadows into the autumn pines, and past the autumn pines, at last, to the bare grass shoulder where the pavilion stands. From the bottom you cannot see the top. From the top you cannot see the bottom. The river valley is hidden behind the curve of the slope, and the high passes beyond are hidden behind the curve of the sky, and the long hill in between is all you can see in either direction. Gold in autumn, white in winter, green in summer, brown in the soft weeks of spring when the snow is going. It is a hill that asks nothing of you except your time. The villagers love it in the way you love a slow neighbor. The pavilion was built, the old woman at the well had told me, by a man whose name no one remembered anymore. A stonemason who came up the long hill one summer in the long ago years, when the villages had been smaller, and the road to the high passes had been busier than it was now. He had built the 4 stone pillars, and the 4 stone benches between them, and the round stone hearth at the center, and the simple slate roof above. He had hung a lantern at the entry. He had set the small iron hook over the fire pit for a kettle. And then he had gone, the way traveling stonemasons go, on to the next valley, and the next bend of the next road, and the pavilion had stayed. It had been used at first by the travelers who took the long hill on their way to the high passes, by shepherds moving their flocks up to summer pasture, by the hunters who came down with skins in the autumn, by any one of the small, ordinary people who use any one of the small, ordinary places along any of the small, ordinary roads of the country, in the slow, long ways that ordinary people have used the world for as long as the world has been. The fire had been kept, the kettle had been hung, the lantern had been lit at the dark hours, by whichever hand happened to be there. For 100 years, perhaps. This was how the pavilion had lived. And then, at some point, the woman had said, in some season many years before her own grandmother had been born, the road to the high passes had quieted, and the shepherds had begun to take a different track that ran along the river, and the hunters had begun to come down the eastern shoulder where the descent was kinder on their loads, and the long hill had begun to be a hill that nobody much climbed. The pavilion had begun to be a pavilion that nobody much used. The lantern had begun to go unlit in some seasons. The fire had begun to go cold for weeks at a time. The kettle had begun to gather dust. And then, at some point after that, the dog man had come. The old woman at the well had not known when. None of them knew when. She had said, "It was before my grandmother's grandmother. It was before the village was here in the shape it is now. It was so long ago, traveler, that the people who say it are only repeating it because their grandmother said it, who heard it from theirs. But it has always been said." He came up the long hill. He chose the pavilion. He has lived there ever since. She had said, "He was a man once, like other men. He had a name. The old people in the village know it still, or some of them say they do, and some of them say they don't. And so I will not give you the name, because half knowing a name is worse than not knowing one." He had been a young man down in some valley far from here. There had been some sadness in his life. He had walked north, the way young men sometimes walk north when there has been sadness, looking for somewhere to put down what they had been carrying. He had walked, the old woman said, until he could not walk any more, and he had stopped where the climbing stopped, which was here, at the pavilion on the top of the long hill. He had not come back down. I had asked her at the well the obvious question, "Why is he called the dog man?" She had looked at me with her dark, patient eyes, the eyes old women have when they are about to tell you the strange part of the story, and they want you to be ready for the strange part. And she had said, "Because in the warm seasons he is a man, and in the cold seasons he is a dog." And that is all anyone can really say about it. She had let me sit with this for a moment. The bucket had gone down into the well. The bucket had come back up. The water had moved a little in it. She had said, "Nobody knows whether it is a curse or a blessing, or a thing he was born with, or a thing that fell on him on the long road north, or a thing he asked for. Nobody knows whether it pains him. The old man at the inn says it is a gift, that there are people in the world whose hearts are too soft to live a single shape all year, and the world makes a place for them. The boy who fetches firewood says it is a punishment, but he could not tell me for what, and I do not trust the things boys say about punishment. Most of us in the village do not say what we think. We only say, "He is the dog man. He becomes a dog when the cold comes. He stays a dog through the winter. He becomes a man again when the snow leaves. And in between, when the change is happening, you do not climb the long hill, because the change is a private thing, and he has earned, by now, his privacy." I had thanked her. I had drunk from the well. I had filled my flask. I had marked the hill on my chart. Pauses. I had thought, as I had walked the next 3 days up out of the valley, about whether I would meet a man at the pavilion or a dog. The autumn was still on the country. The leaves were still gold. The cold had begun to creep down from the high passes. I had felt it in the mornings, the slight new edge on the air, but it had not yet, I thought, come down hard enough to bring on the change. I had hoped to meet the man. I had hoped to ask him, gently and without intrusion, what it was like, what he ate, whether he was alone, whether the rumor was kind to him or unkind, whether the long hill held him well. I had not expected the chair to be empty. I had not expected, when I climbed the last steep stretch of grass shoulder and rounded the last bend of pines and saw the pavilion ahead of me with its lantern already burning, to find no man at all but a dog already asleep on her folded blanket, and a fire already lit by some hand that had gone elsewhere, and a kettle already warm, and an empty chair on the far side of the hearth that looked, in some patient way, like it had been waiting for me, or for him, or for anyone. Perhaps the cold has come earlier this year than I knew. Perhaps the change has already happened, and I have only arrived too late. Perhaps he is on the slope right now, in his man form, gathering wood for the long night, and will come in soon with his arms full and his cheeks red from the wind, and will sit in the chair, and will look at me, and we will both be very quiet for a moment, the way you are very quiet when a stranger and a stranger first see each other across a fire that one of them did not build. I will keep telling. The chair is patient. The night is long. The legend the woman at the well had said has its tender part. Most legends do. And I will tell you the tender part now, friend, because it is the part the village holds gently and turns over carefully when it speaks of him at all. He was not always alone. The story is that in his early years on the long hill, when he had been on the hill perhaps 20 winters, perhaps 30, no one in the village could say, a woman had come up the slope one summer afternoon, looking for an herb that did not grow anywhere else but here. It was a small, pale herb that grew in the high meadows below the pavilion, and the herb women of the river valley used it for the slow aches of old people in their hands and their feet. And there had been an old man in her village whose hands had hurt him for many years, and she had climbed the long hill to fetch the herb for him. She had not known about the dog man. The story does not say why she had not known. Perhaps she was from further down the valley than the rest, where the rumor was thinner. Perhaps she was the kind of young woman who hears rumors and decides for herself whether to carry them. Perhaps the village had simply forgotten to tell her, the way villages sometimes forget to tell a young woman the important rumors, because they assume she will not climb the long hill alone in the first place. But she had, and she had climbed up through the orchards and through the high meadows and through the autumn pines. Except it had been summer then, the pines green and quiet, and she had come to the pavilion, and she had found a man there. He had been sitting in the chair across the fire, the same chair across this same fire. The kettle had been on. He had stood when she had come into the pavilion, and he had not been frightened of her, and she had not been frightened of him, and he had offered her tea. She had sat in the bench by the wall, the same bench, friend, where you are asleep right now, and she had drunk the tea. They had spoken about the small things one speaks of when one is a stranger to a stranger, across a fire that one of them did not build, about the herb, about the village in the valley, about the weather coming up from the south, about the road and the long hill, and the way the road and the long hill folded into each other if you walked them for long enough. She had not asked him his name. He had not given it. She had stayed an hour, maybe 2. The herb had been growing on the meadow shoulder just below the pavilion, and he had walked her down to it, and he had helped her gather it, and he had walked her back to the pavilion, and then he had walked her down to the bend of the path where the trees closed in, and he had said, I will not come further. The path is plain from here. Go well. And she had gone. She had come back the next summer. She had not, the story says, planned to come back. She had simply found, through the long winter and the slow spring, that she was thinking of the pavilion, of the kettle, of the man across the fire, of the way he had been quiet without being unfriendly, and of the way he had walked her down to the bend. She had thought of him, the village says, the way a woman thinks of a quiet stranger she has met once, who has lodged in her in a way she does not understand. So when the summer came again, and the herbs were ready, she had gone up the long hill a second time, and there had been no herb need this time, not really, but she had brought a small jar of jam from her sister's kitchen, and she had said at the pavilion, I have brought you this, and he had looked at her, the story says, for a long, long moment. He had said, "I am glad you came." She had stayed longer that second time, through the afternoon, through supper. They had sat together at the hearth as the sun had gone, and the autumn had not yet come, and the air had been warm at the top of the long hill, in the way summer air is warm at the top of a hill. The day warmth still held in the stones, the lantern not yet lit, the fire low and patient. She had walked down at dusk, and he had walked with her again to the bend, and she had said, "I will come again." He had said, "Please." The third summer she had come, she had stayed 2 days. The fourth summer, a week. The fifth summer she had not gone back down at all. She had come up at the first warm weather with a small pack on her back and her sister's blessing, for her sister had known by then what it was about, even if no one else in the village had. And she had said, "I would like to stay if you would like me to." He had said, "Please." They had become, that fifth summer, a man and a woman who lived together at the pavilion on the long hill. They had laid stones for a small kitchen garden behind the pavilion, on the bit of flat ground where the wind broke least. He had built a low shelter against the outer wall for the goats she had brought up from the valley. She had taught him the small herbs of the high meadows, the ones her grandmother had taught her. He had taught her how to bank the fire so it would burn through the night and still be warm in the morning. They had not married in the way the village would have understood marrying. They had only stayed, and the village down the long hill had begun, slowly, to know that the man on the long hill was not alone anymore, and had begun, in its slow village way, to be glad for him. And he had not told her in that fifth summer what he was. He had meant to. He had told himself every evening of that fifth summer as he had sat across the fire from her that he would tell her the next evening. And then the next evening had come, and the lantern had been lit, and she had been laughing at something one of the goats had done, and he had not been able to find the shape of the sentence in his mouth. He had told himself, "In the autumn, when the leaves begin to turn, I will tell her then." The leaves had begun to turn. He had told himself, "When the first snow comes down off the high passes, I will tell her then. There will be time." The first snow had come. He had told himself, "Tomorrow." She had been sitting on this same bench, friend, the same bench where you are asleep now. And she had been folding a blanket against the cold, and he had walked into the pavilion with his arms full of wood, and he had stopped in the entry, and he had set the wood down, and he had said, "There is something I need to tell you about what happens to me when the cold comes." And she had looked up from the blanket, and she had set the blanket down, and she had said, quietly, in the small, clear voice you use when you have been waiting a long time to say something, "I have known since the first afternoon, the afternoon I came for the herb. I knew when you handed me the cup. I have been waiting for you to know that I knew." He had not at first understood. She had said gently, "I am the same, My mother was from a village further south than yours, in a valley where there are still a few of us. I have known what I was since I was a child. I have never told anyone. I learned to walk down out of the village when the cold came, and to find a quiet place in the woods, and to stay there until the warm returned. I have done this every winter of my life. I have been alone every winter of my life. And then I climbed the long hill, and I drank tea from the hand of a man who was the same. And I did not know what to do except keep coming back and wait for you to be able to say it. He had sat down on the floor by her feet, the story says, and he had put his head against her knee, and he had wept for a long while, the way a person weeps when a thing they have carried alone for the whole of their life is suddenly not theirs alone to carry. She had put her hand on his hair. The fire had burned. The first snow had fallen on the slate roof of the pavilion in soft, small sounds. And that had been the beginning of the long winters they had shared. I am scratching, I notice, behind your ear, friend, without quite meaning to. The story has put me there. You do not seem to mind. Your eyes are still closed. Your tail is twitching very slightly against the blanket. I will let you sleep. The winters they shared, the woman at the well had said, were the warmest winters anyone on the long hill has ever heard tell of. I do not know if this is meant in the simple way that two bodies in a small pavilion keep a small pavilion warm, or in the larger way the village means when it speaks of those winters. I think both, perhaps. I think the village means he had been a man alone for a long time, and she had been a woman alone for a long time, and the years in which they were no longer alone, the years in which the pavilion held two instead of one, were years the long hill carried with a kind of held breath, as if the pavilion itself had been waiting in its slow, patient way for the second to come up the slope. Their winters had a shape. In the late autumn, about this time of year, I think, the time of year I am sitting in now, the cold would begin to come down off the high passes. They would feel it. They would feel the small new edges on the air, and the way their bodies began to lean toward whatever change was waiting in them. They would, the village says, become quieter in the days just before. They would, the village says, take long walks together along the slope in the late afternoons when the gold was leaving the sky, and they would not speak much, and they would hold each other's hand, and they would come back at dusk to the pavilion, and one of them, on the last evening, would light the lantern. She had taught him this, the story says. In the long ago times, he had not lit the lantern in winter. The pavilion had been his alone, and he had not seen any reason to. The dog he became did not need the light. The valleys did not climb up to him. The road past the long hill had gone quiet centuries before. So in those long ago years, his lantern had only burned in the warm seasons, when he had been a man and had needed a small light by which to read or to mend his shirt or to find his cup. In the winters, the lantern had been cold. She had said the first autumn they had been together, when the change was almost on them, "Light the lantern, please, tonight, and every night." He had asked her why. She had said, "Because dogs cannot light lanterns, and because somewhere on the long hill, on some long night, there will be a person climbing in the dark, and they will need the light. They will not need it tonight. They will not need it tomorrow, but they will need it sometime. So light the lantern. Light it now. And tomorrow, before the change comes, light it again, and teach the small mercies of the world to keep it burning through the cold." So he had lit the lantern the night before the change, and the cold had come down hard from the high passes, and the change had come on them both, and the pavilion had become, for the cold season, a place of 2 dogs and not 2 people. And the lantern, though no person had hands to tend it, and no dog can climb a low beam to trim a wick, the lantern had burned. Through the long night, through the next day, through the next night, through the whole cold season. She had said the small mercies would keep it, and the small mercies had kept it. The shape of their winters as dogs, the village says, was a quiet shape. They were not the same dog twice. They were 2 dogs, side by side, and they kept the pavilion warm in the way 2 dogs keep a small space warm by being there. They would lie together by the hearth, friend, on this same bench, perhaps where you lie now, and they would sleep through the long blue afternoons, and they would wake at dusk, and they would go out together onto the slope. This was, the village says, the part the village had loved most to think about. The 2 dogs on the long hill in the blue winter dusk, the long shoulder of grass under snow, the high pines beyond, the valleys spread out below. 2 small dark shapes against the white, walking together, stopping, looking at something far off, walking on. And in the deep cold, in the still nights when the wind had dropped, the dogs would sometimes howl. They would howl together, the village says, not to summon anyone, not to warn, only the way dogs do sometimes in the deep cold, for the joy of the sound going out and for the sound of each other answering. He would howl, she would howl, he would howl again, she would howl again. The valleys would hold the sound a moment and let it go. And the long hill on those nights, the village says, was a hill that hummed quietly with the music of 2 dogs at the top who loved each other. The dogs in the valley had learned to listen. The old man of the village, the woman at the well, had said this part softly, as if she were telling something tender. The old men of the village still remember, from the winters of their childhood, the way the village dogs in the lower valleys would lift their heads when the howl came down from the long hill, the way they would, sometimes, answer back. the way the long hill in winter had a sound the rest of the country did not have. A sound that was not lonely, the old men said, even in the deep cold. A sound of being two. In the warm seasons, when the snow had left, they had been again a man and a woman. The story does not linger here. The warm seasons of their long life together were the simple seasons. The goats, the kitchen garden, the herbs from the high meadow, the small mending of the pavilion's small things. They grew older together. In the slow, patient way two people grow older together when the world has given them a place that holds them. He had grown gray at the temples. She had grown a small, soft line between her eyes that had not been there when she had first climbed the slope for the herb. Their hands had grown calloused in the same places. Their walks down the slope to the bend in the path, the bend where he had once said, "I will not come further," had grown slower year by year as the years walked beside them. But the winters, the village says, had stayed warm. They had been, in those long years, the way one says of a marriage, of a friendship, of any of the deep, ordinary loves that hold the world together. They had been good to each other. They had been good to each other through many winters. The lantern had burned. The pavilion had held them. The howl had gone out, and the howl had come back. And the howl had gone out, and the howl had come back. And on the long hill above the river valley, in the deep cold of many winters, there had been a sound, the old men of the village remember, of two dogs calling. I am looking up at the lantern, friend, as I tell you this, the lantern above us, the one that was already burning when I came in. I cannot quite work out who lit it tonight. It was lit well before the dusk took the slope, and I saw no man on the path, and I have heard no footsteps come or go since I sat down. Someone passing through, perhaps, who lit it and went on. Or perhaps the small mercies still keep it, the way she said they would. The story is older than I am. There may be parts of it that go on by themselves now. I will let myself believe that one. It is a kinder thought for a tired traveler at the end of a long climb. The hardest part of the story is the next part. The woman at the well had told it to me carefully. She had set down her bucket, and she had folded her hands in her lap, and she had told it the way you tell the hardest parts, which is slowly and without ornament. I will try to tell it the same way. There came a winter late in their long life together, when word came up from the valley. A boy from the village had climbed the slope in late autumn, when the cold was almost down, but had not yet quite arrived. And he had stood at the entry of the pavilion, and he had asked, in the small, careful way village boys ask things of the people on the long hill, for the woman. He had brought a folded letter. The letter was from her sister who still lived in the valley, who had been the one who had blessed her going up the long hill all those summers ago. Her sister was ill. Not gravely ill, the letter said. Not dying, but ill enough that she had asked for her sister to come and to sit with her a while, and to help in the house until the worst of it had passed. She had read the letter twice, the story says. She had folded it back along its old folds. She had looked at the man across the fire. She had said, "I will go." He had said, "I will come with you." She had said gently, "No, my love, you cannot. You are too well known in the village now, in the village's slow way. They have seen you down at the bend of the path over the years, walking me to the bend, walking back. They have begun to call you the dogman's friend. They do not know yet that you are the dogman, but they have begun to make a story of you, and a story of you walking into the village in late autumn will be a story they will work over for years, and they will work the wrong shape out of it. Stay, I will go down. I will tend my sister. I will come back up before the change comes for either of us. There is time. The cold has not come down hard yet. We still have weeks." He had not wanted her to go. The story is clear on this. He had not wanted her to go, and he had said so, and she had taken his hands in hers, and she had said, "I will come back. I always come back. I am very careful. I have been very careful my whole life. The cold will not catch me down there. I will be home before it does." She had taken her small bag. She had gone down with the boy. The boy had come back up alone 2 days later with a brief message that she had reached the village safely and was sitting with her sister. He had thanked the boy. He had given the boy a piece of dried apple. He had watched the boy go back down the slope. He had stood at the entry of the pavilion for a long while, looking at the path and at the bend in the trees where the path disappeared, and he had not moved. She had not come back when she had said she would. The village down below was 3 days' walk if you went without hurry, and her sister's illness had been the kind that might keep her a week, or 2, or maybe 3. And so when she had not come back at the end of the 2nd week, he had told himself, "She has stayed longer for her sister, and she is being careful." When she had not come back at the end of the 3rd week, he had told himself, "She is being very careful, and the path has been hard with the early frost, and she is waiting for a kinder day." When she had not come back at the end of the 4th week, the cold had come down hard from the high passes, and the snow had begun to fall on the slate roof of the pavilion in steady, soft sounds. And the change had come on him, and he had been alone. He had been a dog, alone at the pavilion that winter. The story does not, the woman at the well had said, dwell on what happened to her in the village. The village had known only that her sister had recovered, that she had begun the climb home one evening in late autumn, a little later perhaps than was wise, but the cold had not quite come down yet, and the path was still open, and that she had not been seen since. The village had assumed she had reached the pavilion. The pavilion, in its quietness through the cold months, had not sent any word otherwise. Why would it? The pavilion did not, in winter, send word about anything. The village had assumed. The man at the pavilion had assumed nothing. He had only known when the change had come on him and she had not been there, that the howl that had always come back was not coming back. Hush, friend, hush. I'm sorry. The story has gone to a difficult place. I will tell it more softly. Let me put my hand here, on your side. There. Yes. Sleep. He had howled, the village says, every night of that winter. The village had heard him. The old men, the old women, the dogs in the lower valleys, who had been used to hearing the music of two voices from the long hill, lifted their heads in confusion and answered him as best they could. But they were valley dogs, and their answers were small things, and they were not what he was calling for. He howled, he waited, he howled again, he waited, he howled. The howl that had always come back did not come back. The village did not that winter climb the long hill. The cold was very deep, and the snow was very heavy, and the path was very hard, and the village did not, the woman at the well had said, want to climb up and find what they would have found if they had climbed up. They had told themselves, she has gone home. She has reached the pavilion. She is there with him. They are warm. They are well. The howling is only the howling that has always been the music of the long hill in winter. But they had known, the old people who had been listening for many years, that this was not the same music. They had known the difference, the old men say now, between the music of two voices and the music of one voice calling for another. They had heard it that winter. They had not climbed up. The spring had come, the way springs come, slowly, in small private apologies. And the snow had begun to leave the long hill, and the change had returned him to his man form, and he had walked down the slope alone in early thaw, with the wet brown of the path under his boots, and the gold of the early willows beginning at the lower meadows, and his hands shaking inside the gloves that had been hers. He had come into the village. The village had been very quiet when they had seen him. They had not, until then, been certain that he was anything other than a man who lived alone on the long hill. The rumor of the dogman had been a rumor, half believed, half set aside, and they had not connected the rumor to the man they had seen at the bend in the path on summer evenings. But that morning, the spring he came down alone, the village had looked at him, and the village had understood, in some slow gathering way, what had happened, and what he was, and that he had been a dog alone on the long hill all winter, calling for her. They had told him gently what they knew, that her sister had recovered, that she had begun the climb, that she had not been seen since. He had not wept, the story says. He had only thanked them. He had asked very quietly if anyone had searched. They had said no. They had assumed. He had nodded. He had said, I will search now. He had searched the slope of the long hill that spring for many weeks. He had searched the meadows where the herbs still grew. He had searched the autumn pines. He had searched the bend in the path, and below the bend, and the soft sides of the slope where the snow gathered deepest. He had found nothing. The valley had searched the woods between the village and the foot of the long hill. They had found nothing. She was simply gone. Pure quiet, fire crackles once, soft kettle, slow wind, the dog very still. The story does not say the woman at the well had told me what happened to her. The story does not say if she fell, if she became confused in the cold, if she changed too soon in the woods and could not find her way home in dog form, if she found her way somewhere else entirely and is there still, if she is alive somewhere and has forgotten herself the way they sometimes do, the woman at the well had said. Or if she is not, the story does not say. The story only says she did not come back. And the man on the long hill, the village says, climbed back up to the pavilion when the spring search was finished. And he sat in the chair across the fire, the chair across this fire, friend, the empty one. And he stayed. He lit the lantern that next autumn before the change came. He has lit it every autumn since. And every winter, when the cold comes down and the change comes on him, he howls. The howl goes out. The valleys hold it a moment. The howl does not come back, but he howls again, and again, and again, for as long as the winter lasts. And then the spring comes, and he is a man again, and he goes on. And the autumn comes, and he lights the lantern, and the change comes, and he howls. And this, the village says, is what he has been doing for a very long time. The story, as the woman at the well had told it to me, ends here, not in the way stories sometimes end, with a resolution, with a knot tied off, but in the way some stories end, which is simply, this is where we are now. This is what is true now. This is what the long hill is. When you ask the village. I had asked her at the well the questions a traveler asks when a story has been left open. I had asked, do they think she is still alive somewhere? She had said, some of them do. Some of them say she comes back in some quiet form on some night he is not listening and slips away again before he wakes, because she does not know how to come home to a place she has been gone from for so long. Some of them say she is on another hill, in some other valley, calling out a howl of her own that does not come back to her either, and that her howl and his howl are crossing each other in the air over the country every winter night, and have been crossing for many years, and have not yet met. Some of them say she is gone, just gone, the way people sometimes are. She had said, "I do not know which it is, traveler. The old men of the village say one thing, the old women say another. The boy who fetches firewood says a third thing, and I have already told you what I think of what boys say. I think." And she had stopped and looked into the bucket for a moment, and the water in the bucket had moved a little. "I think that he does not know either, and I think that is the hardest part. Not the not coming back, the not knowing." I had asked her also, "Does no one in the village climb up?" She had said, "Some have over the years, mostly young people who have not yet learned that some places do not want to be visited. A few old people on quiet errands who walked up with bread and walked back down without bread. The boy who fetches firewood goes up sometimes in late summer to leave a small jar of jam on the stone bench by the wall. The bench, friend, where you are asleep right now. Because the village remembers that she once carried a small jar of jam up the long hill, and the village would like the pavilion to know that the village has not forgotten. The boy comes back down. He does not see the man. He has never seen the man. The pavilion is always empty when he goes in. He leaves the jam. He leaves. I had asked her, "Have you climbed?" She had said with the smallest of smiles, "I am too old. I climbed once when I was a girl. The man had been there. He had given me tea. He had walked me down to the bend in the path. He had said, 'I will not come further. The path is plain from here. Go well.' He had walked back up. I think of him often. I will not climb again. The long hill is for younger feet now." I had thanked her. I had drunk again from the well. I had filled my flask. I had marked the long hill on my chart, and I had marked the village too, with a small symbol beside it that I have for the villages where the people tell their stories slowly. There are a few such villages on my chart. They are some of the kindest dots on it. I had climbed. I had been 3 days on the slow slope. The first day through the orchards, and the second day through the high meadows where the herb still grows in small soft patches, and the third day up through the autumn pines to the bare grass shoulder where the pavilion stands. The leaves had come down around me the whole climb. The cold had been creeping in at the mornings, but the cold had not yet, I thought, come down hard from the high passes. I had thought I was arriving in time to meet him as a man. I had been wrong, perhaps, or I had been right, but the man had been gone, out on the slope, gathering wood, walking the high meadows one last time before the change. Or I had been wrong, and the change had come earlier this year than I had thought, and the man was already the dog asleep on the blanket, and the dog was the one who had welcomed me by leaving the fire burning, by warming the kettle, by setting 2 cups on the hearth, the way someone sets 2 cups on a hearth who has been setting 2 cups for many, many years, and has not learned to set only one. I do not know which it is. I cannot, sitting here in this chair, looking at the empty chair across the fire, looking at the lantern above me, looking at you on the bench by the wall, friend. I cannot tell. I had thought on the climb up of what I would say to him. I had thought of asking him gently about the rumor. I had thought of asking him what it was like, the change, the cold months, the warm months, the howl that does not come back. I had thought of asking him whether he believes the stories the village tells about her, whether he believes one of them, or all of them, or none. I had thought of asking him whether the howl is still a calling, or whether it has become by now only a habit. The way the old people in the villages keep doing the small things their lost ones used to do. Keep setting the table for one extra. Keep leaving the door on the latch. Keep the lantern at the entry. Whether the howl is calling, or whether the howl is only the small daily work of remembering. I had a great many things I had wanted to ask him, but the chair is empty, and I do not, friend, want to wake you to ask you any of this on his behalf. You are sleeping the soft, slow sleep of a creature who is at home in a place. I will not disturb that. I will say only this, and then I will let the story rest. I think the village is wrong in one small way. I think there is no version of the story in which his howl has not, in some quiet form, been answered. Not by her, perhaps. Not in the way he is listening for. But somewhere, in some valley, in some old village by some well, in some woman drawing water and telling a young traveler the story she has been carrying her whole life. In some boy carrying a small jar of jam up a long hill in late summer. In some chart on some traveler's lap with a small word, pavilion, written beside a small, careful dot. Somewhere his howl is being heard and being held and being answered in 100 small, quiet ways that are not, perhaps, the howl coming back, but are at least the howl not going out into nothing. I do not know if this would comfort him, friend. I do not know if it would comfort you to hear me say it in your sleep, in the chair across his empty one. I do not know. I am only a traveler. I have only the road and the chart and the small, slow work of listening to what villages tell me. But I think the howl has been heard. I am sure of it. Even sitting here at this fire, in this pavilion, on this long hill, on the autumn night when the cold has almost, but not quite, come down. I am very sure of it. There, you stirred. I am sorry, friend. You are dreaming of running, perhaps, of running through the long meadows in the warm seasons, of running with someone. Sleep on. The story is done. The fire is warm. The chair across is patient. have stopped speaking some time ago. I had not noticed when. The fire is low now, lower than when I had begun, and the kettle has gone quiet, and the autumn leaves are still drifting in through the columns of the pavilion in soft, slow drifts that settle on the warm stones, and on your blanket, friend, and on my boots, and around the rim of the empty cup beside the empty chair across the fire. I look at the chair for a long time. It is a good chair. The wood is dark with use. The arms are worn in the places arms wear when they have been rested on for many years by the same pair of hands. The cushion is soft. The cup beside it on the warm stone is clean and waiting. The blanket folded over its back is folded the way someone folds a blanket who has been folding the same blanket in the same way for a long time. It is a chair that is patient. I do not think he will come tonight, friend. I do not know why I think this. I cannot, sitting in this chair across from his, give you the reason. I had hoped he would. I had climbed 3 days up the long hill to meet him, and I had brought my questions in the small folded paper of my chart, and I had set them down beside me on the bench when I had sat, gently the way you set down a small bag of seeds you do not want to scatter. And I had been ready to ask, but the chair has been empty since I came in, and it is empty now, and the lantern above us is burning low, and the night is settling, and I do not think he will come. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps not. But will you tell him, friend, when he comes back, whenever that is? Will you tell him that a stranger climbed the long hill tonight to find him? Will you tell him that a stranger sat in his chair across his fire and poured himself a cup from his kettle and was warm? Will you tell him that the stranger had heard the rumor from an old woman at the well 3 days down, and had marked the hill on his chart and had come up? Will you tell him? And, friend, if you can, will you tell him also this, that the stranger told him his own story tonight, the way he had heard it from the woman at the well, the whole of it, the arrival, the herb, the two who had met, the long winters they had shared, the lantern she had taught him to light, the winter she had not come back, the howl that has gone out every cold night since into the long valleys. Will you tell him that a stranger told all of this back to him in the warm pavilion on an autumn evening while a dog slept on a folded blanket on the bench by the wall, and that the stranger was sorry on his behalf about the howl that does not come back? Tell him that. Tell him also that the stranger thought, sitting in his chair, looking up at his lantern, watching you breathe, that the howl has been heard, that it has not gone out into nothing. Tell him that. Tell him a traveler said it. He does not have to believe it. He only has to know that someone has said it to him. That is what I would say, friend, if he came back tonight. That is what I would say. You have opened your eyes. You are looking at me. It is a long look. Slow, patient, the kind of look that has weight in it, the way old looks have weight. And I do not entirely know, friend, what to make of it. You have not looked at me before tonight in all the hours I have sat here. You have only slept and shifted and dreamt. But you are looking at me now, and the fire is on your face, and the lantern is above us, and the autumn wind is moving very softly in the columns, and the night is very long. Go back to sleep, friend. I am sorry, the story has been a long one. I should not have told it so loud. There, yes, sleep. I will sleep here a little, I think. I will not take the chair. The chair is his. I will lie here on the bench beside you. There is room. You have made room. And I will pull my coat over me, and I will let the fire keep through the night, and the lantern will keep above us, and the kettle will be quiet, and the autumn leaves will keep drifting in. The chart is folded in my satchel. The empty parts of the map are waiting. They will wait. I close my eyes. I can hear the fire, the small soft tick of a log settling, the whisper of the kettle cooling, the hush of autumn leaves against the slate roof. Somewhere in the columns, the slow creak of old stone resting into itself for the night. Beside me, friend, the slow, soft breathing of a creature who is at home. Somewhere tonight, a lantern is burning. For him, for me, for someone. It is the same lantern.